All right. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome again. Thank you so much for joining. Really excited about our conversation today, bridging predictive analytics and peer mentorship for higher retention. I'm very excited to be highlighting this partner impact event with the University of Wisconsin-Superior. My name is Emily Barrett. I'm a Partnerships Development Director here at Mentor Collective. I've been with Mentor Collective for a few years and spent about 10 years working for institutions of higher education prior to that. Very excited to be facilitating this conversation with some of our rockstar partners at UW-Superior. Our speakers today are Dr. Maria Cuzzo, the Provost at UW-Superior, and Megan Torkildson, the Director of the Educational Success Center. They're going to introduce themselves in a few minutes. I promise you will not be hearing mostly from me today, but instead I will let our wonderful speakers lead the conversation, but we'll hear a little bit more from them through about this conversation through the lens of their role at the institution. Before we get started, I just wanted to highlight some best practices to ensure that your virtual experience is seamless. Feel free to adjust your video layout to speaker view, and we found that if your camera is on, it does allow for a more engaging conversation. At Mentor Collective, we believe in the power of relationships, so please feel free to introduce yourself via chat. You can go ahead and share your name, your institution, your role if you'd like, and who knows, some of your colleagues might actually be with us today. Also, the Zoom chat will be open throughout the webinar, so feel free to leverage it if you have any questions or you'd like to connect with others. And finally, please do use the reaction feature. This is my absolute favorite feature of Zoom, but feel free to give us a thumbs up or a heart if we hit on a topic that really makes an impact for you. A brief overview of our agenda. As I've mentioned, our wonderful speakers are going to lead the discussion on peer mentorship initiatives that they've used to elevate institutional strategy and contextualize the predictive analytics that they're using. We'll look at University of Wisconsin as a case study, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So before we dive into our conversation today, I'd love to hear a little bit from the audience. What are some of your top barriers to driving student success? Are they decentralized and siloed data collection, budget constraints, faculty, staff, and capacity constraints, underutilization of student support services, or a lack of student belonging and engagement? I don't know if we have an option on our poll, but all of the above could also be a good answer. We know there's a lot of challenges facing higher education right now. All right, we're starting to see some answers come in. Lots of answers. We're seeing probably one of our strongest ones. If we want to go ahead and start sharing the results, although I do see more answers coming in. So it looks like our top result here is a lack of student belonging and engagement. Although I'm not happy that that is a challenge many of you are facing, I am happy that it is a big part of the conversation that we're going to have today. So hopefully our speakers can provide some useful tips and things that they've used at their campus and what they've seen amongst their student body to help drive student belonging and engagement. Also seeing budget constraints. We'll definitely touch on this in our conversation today. We know it is a very resource-constrained environment in today's higher education landscape. And then it looks like underutilization of student support services is another key challenge that some of you are facing. Thank you all for sharing that. I think this will weave nicely into the conversation that we're having today. But before we do, I just wanted to frame the context of our conversation and think a little bit about the realities of higher education today. So first and foremost, we see shrinking student engagement. We see that about 65% of high school students are saying that higher education is not worth the cost. it's harder and harder to get students in the door. And we know that many students whose entire high school experience was impacted by COVID are engaging in different ways. And many of our campus partners are seeing lower levels of engagement, which means it's that much more important to ensure that students are engaged and that they're utilizing the resources on campus. We also see an increase in growing student need. 55% of students identified substantial increases in depression, hopelessness, and loneliness due to COVID-19. Students that are arriving at your institution are coming with low awareness of the resources that are available to them and a higher level of need. There's a gap between when students arrive and an understanding of what and where those resources are. I know that for many of you, top of mind is always retaining and graduating students, but also in an equitable way. We know that students who are low income and first generation learners have a much lower chance of completing their degree. Getting to those students, being able to identify those students and giving them the resources and ability to foster a sense of belonging is incredibly important. And then finally, we're seeing limited administrative capacity. 37% of you responded in the poll that this is a big challenge for you on your campus. We know that 50% of higher ed professionals are reporting clinically meaningful levels of burnout. You're being asked to do more and more with fewer resources, and you're probably wearing many, many hats. Anyone in this room have a title that has suddenly gotten a lot longer, maybe with an and in between? So we know that this is really difficult. Even though you have these resources available to students, you might not have the administrative capacity to reach the students that need this help in the moment that they do need these resources. Additionally, this is a graph from the Titan study, Driving Towards a Degree. This is, for me, a really powerful visualization of one of the gaps that we're seeing in higher education. What you see here in purple are the student support services available to students according to institutions. So a lot of institutions are investing significantly in the resources that they're providing students based on the challenges we just saw: academic advising, tutoring and academic support, student health clinic, financial aid counseling, career advising. What's really interesting here is that when we look at the green, these are the support services that are available to students according to students. So this is where we see a really significant gap in student resource awareness and student resource utilization. I wanted to kind of put that information out there to frame our conversation. I know just a few slides ago, I promised that you would not be hearing from me the entire time. So with that, I'd like to bring our wonderful speakers into the conversation. I'll start with you, Dr. Cuzzo, but I'd love to hear through your lens as the provost, how does your institution define student success?
Thanks so much, Emily, and welcome everybody to today's session. My name is Maria Cuzzo. I'm the Provost and Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at UW Superior and a very proud 25-year faculty member at the same institution. My lens today is really through the eyes of upper administration, the Provost in particular, in attempting to reach good results with student success initiatives. Megan, would you like to take a minute and introduce yourself and your lens?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Megan Torkildson. I am the director of the Educational Success Center, the Navigate lead on campus, the Mentor Collective lead, and coordinator of disability support services. So like Emily talked about capacity, lots of ands added to my title. I've been with UW Superior for almost 7 years. I started in admissions and worked my way to where I'm at. And my lens is probably more from the student side of things, mentor side of things, but also how we are integrating things into our predictive analytics within Navigate, since that is also in my wheelhouse. This year, we really took into consideration what we're getting from Navigate and what we're getting from Mentor Collective, and how are we going to utilize those together.
Thank you both so much for that introduction. Megan, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how UW Superior looks at a vision of success for students?
I think that's me, Emily.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah. So I would like to share with you some work that our institution did intensely over the last 18 months in what was called the Student Success Initiative. This brought together cross-disciplinary experts from throughout the campus in order to vision what a successful student success would be over the next 5 to 7 years of the institution. One of the key pieces we worked on was this definition. What is student success at UW Superior? Now, the first thing I'd like to point out about this is that we have written it in the student voice. We are talking to our students rather than the third-party voice that is so common in these definitions. So the promise that we made is empowering you, the student, to reach their academic, personal, and professional goals, to have high-quality facilities and services, to support excellence in the curriculum, co-curriculum, and extracurricular within a culture of inclusion, to provide high-quality career preparedness and advanced education preparation to further life goals, fostering intellectual, social, personal, physical, emotional development and well-being. This one was very important because we are committed overtly to the holistic student and recognizing that there is much more going on with their development during the collegiate years than academic development. And finally, the fostering your sense of belonging, civic engagement, and preparation for global citizenship. So as our team brainstormed these particular aspects of student success, belongingness rapidly reached a high level. And again, I was heartened to see that that was the #1 result of the poll that we're all struggling with in our various ways as institutions. So if you could click to the next slide. We concluded our definition with the idea of we measure student success by consulting with students on their goals. And here, Mentor Collective becomes a very important tool for us to allow those peer-to-peer conversations about student goals to occur, as well as numerous other programs here at UW Superior. And of course, we critically examine institutional data points, such as we all do, with persistence, retention, and graduation rates, to ensure that the numbers back up that students are achieving their goals. Now, this definition is winding its way through shared governance at this point in time. We have every hope that this will be formally approved and will become our institutional statement in terms of student success. Now, when we try to break it down, though, into what are we trying to achieve with this view of student success, the next slide talks about the uplifting of student success for the student perspective. So our #1 goal right now as an institution, as I'm sure is true for many of you as well, is improving retention. We have a low retention rate compared to peer colleagues within the UW system. We know that this is the greatest opportunity point that we have as an institution to level out our economic health and to also ensure that our students are achieving their goals by coming to college. So our retention efforts right now are including specific things like skill development, networking. We are implementing a new program in Purpose First, which came from Complete College America, to allow students to set the why of why they are coming to college and what matters most to them right away at the beginning in the freshman year. We're also working on opportunities to have students obtain clarity about strengths and weaknesses and leadership skills that they may have or want to develop in college, and to set plans for successful retention and graduation for them through strong academic planning. The very core of what we're doing, though, is about relationships. And here again, that's where Mentor Collective comes into play directly. We know that a key part of belonging are the relationships that students form, both with each other as fellow students, but also with our faculty and staff members across the campus. So what we have discovered with Mentor Collective is a very systematic, planful, intentional, and well-supported way to grow that peer-to-peer mentor relationship that can be one of the most powerful things that happen to people in their collegiate experience. We're also attempting to create a lot of social, emotional connections with our students through many different levels of programming, not unlike what all of you are doing, I'm sure. And we are encouraging their involvement, not only in the academic realm, but in the co-curricular and working on that holistic view of the student. Finally, in the final column, we are providing a ton of support by providing resources and advocacy about academic success. I love that slide that Emily put up there right before she introduced us of the gap between all that we are doing as institutions and how our students perceive that. So at UW Superior, I'm very proud that we have a broad base of support. Almost every one of those bars that were on the graph we offer, but we struggle like other people of how do we get our students to find these supports? And we're working on some initiatives right now to help that effort to get better.
Thank you so much, Maria, for providing that really comprehensive view of what student success looks like at UW Superior. And one thing that really jumps out to me so significantly is how student first oriented you and your team are. Megan, can you tell us a little bit more about what that student population looks like at UW Superior?
Yeah, so you see all of our lovely numbers here. So this is something that, for me, I look at it and I see it as an opportunity for us. So we're looking at this saying, okay, majority of our students are full-time. We have a lot of first-generation students. We have an increasing online student population. And I think that that's probably pretty common in most places. If you have online programs, you're seeing an increase in students utilizing those programs. So what we're really looking and trying to figure out is how do we meet all of the different student profiles. So like Maria said, we have a lot of different initiatives. We have a lot of different support systems, but how do we take Mentor Collective? How do we take these different pieces from Navigate and build different strategies based on the different student profiles that we have? So we may have a, 28-year-old student who is a full-time student, who is a mom, who's working full-time, but then we also have our traditional incoming student who maybe also is a student athlete. Very different students, and the strategy to create sense of belonging and that support for those students is going to look really different. And so what we've been doing a lot of is looking at those predictive analytics pieces, and we also are just really trying to build out what that looks like for us. One of the biggest things for me in our office in the Educational Success Center is really identifying the fact that we're meeting students where they're at. So this definition of student success that we've created as an institution really plays into that. We're super student-centered, and it's something that can be hard for some folks to understand when we're saying, this student, if they get a C in this class, that is success for them. While another student, if they don't get a 4.0 GPA, it's not success. So it's really trying to make those meaningful connections with students to try to understand what their goals are, but also recognizing that students aren't always going to talk to us as professional staff. So how do we leverage our mentors to be able to gain some of that information so that we can support students in that way?
Thank you. I think that's so insightful. And I think the student first approach that you have, coupled with making sure you're meeting students where they're at in a very personalized ways, what has made your programs and initiatives so successful. With that in mind, can you tell me a little bit more about why you prioritize peer mentorship in your student success strategy?
Yeah, so we have a goal to create a differentiated care strategy or network across campus. And a lot of that is being done through our EAB Navigate program. So we've created this culture around differentiated care, and that, again, every student is going to be a little bit different. And one of the things that we recognize of the many initiatives that we have happening on campus right now is that Mentor Collective is the only peer-led initiative that we have. And that's really, really important in my eyes. And we want to think about how we can engage students from that peer perspective, and then utilize the peer and institutional resources together. So something we've heard from students, like I'm sure many of you have also heard, is that they don't really feel connected to campus. And even though we all have activities and student clubs and orgs and all these different things that can connect students, they're still not feeling that connection. So it gives us an opportunity to really use that peer-led programming to be able to build those relationships. And it also gives us an opportunity to build relationships with our mentors. So we're able to make those connections with the mentors give them some guidance and support through the process. And then in the same turn, they're building those relationships with their mentees. And one of the things that we really like to see or want to see, and we are seeing, is that our mentors are really good at modeling some of this behavior for our mentees. And so it's normalizing the help-seeking behaviors, figuring out how they need to get support, where they need to get support, and who's going to give them some of that information. And I think when we look at it from that perspective, from that students come first perspective, it doesn't matter if a student's getting that information from me as a professional staff, from their faculty member, or from their peers. And if we have peer mentors that are trained and have some more information and more understanding of how to guide students through some of these things, the better off we are. I think the best example we have is really, we've had several mentees reach out to their mentors that, they're really struggling in their math class, or they're really struggling in one of their courses. And so the mentor is able to give that student resources. We have a 24/7 tutoring platform called NetTutor that you have access to on Canvas. Or, hey, I actually needed math support last year in one of my classes, and I was tutored by this specific student. Here's how you can schedule an appointment with them. Or I work directly with the tutoring and testing coordinator, Trish, and she's wonderful. Here's her contact information. She'll help you get things figured out. I think it's a little less intimidating for students when they have a peer giving them some of that guidance initially and connecting them with those professional resources. And at some point in time, it would be wonderful too if our mentors would just walk mentees into us as they needed support. That's the end goal, hopefully, but it's really, really thinking about the students come first, and it doesn't matter if it's from us, faculty, peers. We just want to make sure everybody has the proper information so that students know what is all available to them.
So Megan did an excellent job in describing what we call our origin story. And one other part of that is we adopted Mentor Collective right as COVID was beginning. And that means that the first year and a half of that program, we did not really have a high profile on it. Many people did not know that we were partners with Mentor Collective. It was just a chaotic time all the way around for all of us, I'm sure. But when we hit our second year, we began working intensely on this student success initiative, and our current strategic plan, called Forward Superior, also placed students at the center of the entire plan. And it was really then that I, as an administrator, began to realize the potential positive impact that working with peer-to-peer mentorship could do for our overall goals of improving student success. And so I began elevating over time the importance of the success of the Mentor Collective program, and mentorship is just a way to enhance student success with the peer-to-peer support. I mean, all those years ago, I recall the power of peers in my own collegiate experience. And I think what's lasting about all that is the power of relationship. And so when people can have relationship with their peers, it just gives another source of reliable information that sometimes makes it easy for students to be able to come on board. So the prioritization part of the story was the rapid elevation of this program over the last year and a half on the campus. And now we are finding all kinds of different ways to try to build in intentionally peer mentorship as one of our primary student success strategies.
Thank you both so much for providing that really rich context on why peer mentorship became a key component of that student success strategy. And I, again, want to just highlight and champion that with this vision for Forward Superior, students coming first and being very student-centered, that it's continuing through that peer mentorship. I think, Megan, what you highlighted as peer mentorship being the peer component of a retention strategy is a very innovative way to approach a holistic look at retention. So we've talked a little bit about what does student success look like and why peer mentorship. So with that, I want to dig a little bit deeper into your actual program taking a look at UW Superior as a case study, and looking at some of the results that have come from that. So when we look at your student success peer program design, we see the goals for that were around supporting students transition to college, fostering a sense of belonging and community for UW Superior students as they transition, and creating touch points to connect students with resources. Your mentors are peers, students in upper division, and your mentees are first-year students who have been identified as needing high or moderate levels of support. And now we'll talk through what that means for you as we look a little bit more at your program details. Some of the components of your program that we're using to create this, to capture this data and to integrate this data with your predictive analytics come through the intake and matching survey, the assessment surveys that are run 3 times a year. And then we also have that on-demand mentor training for your students as a professional development opportunity. In the first year of the program, we ran from August 2021 through April of 2022. In year 2, we launched mentor recruitment and started the participant experience in April and ran that through the end of your academic year in May of 2023. And then in year 3, we started with the participant experience again in April 2023, and we're currently running that program. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from both of you. What have you learned so far about the impact of mentorship on retention and sense of belonging?
Yeah, so this is still something that's a little bit new to us because some of this data that is now available through Mentor Collective wasn't available when we first started. And so we really are trying to figure out how to utilize this data and come up with some of those strategies still. But one of the things that I was able to put together this year with our model was looking at our predictive analytics support levels in Navigate. And so we, rather than focusing on, okay, this is a new freshman student and they fit into this little category based off of, you know, Pell Grant eligibility, whatever that looks like. We decided to put that towards our predictive analytics model. And within the dashboard on Mentor Collective, we're actually able to see how many students are low support, high support, moderate support. So it gives us a better breakdown of kind of where students are at and what that looks like. But it opens up so much opportunity for us moving forward. This is, you know, was intended for our high support level students to make more of those connections on campus. But we'll talk a little bit more later about what that actually looked like. But our high support level students tend to have more connections on campus, right? So we have a bridge program, which is a first year program for incoming students that need a little bit more support. We have our trio programs. We have a program for non-traditional and veteran students. But when we saw the breakdown of the data, it showed that really the majority of our students participating in Mentor Collective were low support students. So it opened our eyes a bit wider to where we have this opportunity to expand that sense of belonging to all students, not just our new incoming students. So that's something that has been really impactful for us because it's really changed our strategy on how we want to move forward with utilizing Mentor Collective.
And Megan, if I could just piggyback on that for just one moment. It was interesting that particular insight about the low support students benefiting the most from the Mentor Collective peer relationship was happening at the same time. There was a parallel track conversation going on among upper administration about identifying the students that frequently have low or no touch points coming into the university and throughout their time there. And as it turns out, many of these low support students are the ones that kind of do not have natural touch points at all. The underlying assumption is that because they are low support, they don't need that. And that misses the boat entirely around the sense of belonging, because belonging should be cultivated amongst all students, each in their own ways. And this was a huge insight for us in having those two parallel track conversations come together.
I think you highlight really well, Dr. Cuzzo, the importance of looking at this strategically across the student success initiatives that are happening, and the importance of those two conversations happening at the same time, which led us to some of these results that we see here now. Megan, do you want to talk us through some of these results?
Yeah, so I think it's hopefully pretty self-explanatory. So we have a breakdown of our high support students, low support students, mentored versus not mentored. So what we really saw was, 12% of our low support students who had a mentor retained at a higher rate than our non-mentored students. And even with our high support students, we saw a 7% increase in retention rate. So that's a pretty big jump. When we're looking at what our goals are as an institution to raise our retention rates, this fits into where we need to be. And so I think that was something that really stuck out, probably both to myself and Maria, that it's working. And it's working for a group of students that we actually didn't intend it to work for initially. So it kind of just, it opened up more doors, like I had said previously.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're showing here the data for the mentee retention. I also want to note that in the work we've done with your IR, we have also noticed that mentors are retaining at very high rates as well. We often, when we're talking about these programs, think about the benefit for mentees, but we sometimes forget to mention that there is also a strong benefit for mentors in driving their own sense of belonging and their own community on campus. So what does that look like for you?
How to unmute myself. So again, still new info for us as we're trying to navigate through how we will utilize these different pieces. But we see the value. Our institution as a whole sees the value in the sense of belonging. And so really it's now coming up with some of those strategies of, we have this data, we have the predictive analytics tools. I'll talk a little bit more in a couple slides, maybe it's the next slide, about a couple of other things too, but it's really giving us the opportunity to focus on this sense of belonging for a really good chunk of our student population.
Yeah, and one thing I would add just institutionally is one of the challenges over the last several years, since we intensely went after student success as a top institutional priority, was how do we measure it? And the tools of Mentor Collective have really been invaluable in finding ways where we actually could measure a student self-perception of belonging. And so by welding this tool together with some of the other work that we're doing with our other initiatives, we finally got something we can track pretty effectively, and as you could see, 3 times per year. So that gives you an ongoing stream of data, which is very valuable to us on belonging.
I think, again, just highlighting how you're using multiple different tools and connecting those pieces of data, it is really exciting to see how you're able to do more with less, focusing in on that. Megan, academic self-efficacy here also assessed 3 times per year. Do you want to speak a little bit about what some of this data is contributing to that overall conversation?
Yeah, so this one is what I was referring to in the previous slide, that a lot of our low support level students, and we have some data further down as well to support this, but they're coming in typically pretty prepared for college as far as academics are concerned. And so this gives us the opportunity to really look at ways to implement that sense of belonging. What are things that we can do to continue to build that? We're not necessarily going to be focusing on how do we make sure they know tutoring supports and all of these other very specific academic supports. They'll get that general information, but typically these students are academically fairly prepared as they come in. And so it just gives us that opportunity to focus on the sense of belonging. How do we make sure that they're engaged on campus, making the different connections, making them feel like they belong? And whether that is, again, an online student, a traditional first year freshman, a non-traditional students, looking at those student profiles to make the best and create the best strategy. But it also gives us an opportunity to somewhat monitor students in the higher moderate support level. If they're indicating to us that they have a high academic self-efficacy, but then we're seeing on the back end within Navigate that some of these students are getting progress reports at the 4-week mark or the 8-week mark, it gives us an opportunity to potentially utilize their mentor to do some of that intervention as well, to kind of start talking through that and figuring out, is it the academic side of things, or is it still that sense of belonging piece? Are you not feeling connected? And I hear it a lot. We have students on our campus that come in and they are, a major scholarship recipient, and they come in and they do not do well their first semester. And people are like, well, why is that? They did so well. They have this scholarship. They're doing all of these things. But if a student isn't feeling connected to campus, that impacts so much for them. And so I think it's an opportunity for us to almost, I hate to say this because I am in academic support, that's my area, but to transition some of that academic support focus into that sense of belonging support focus.
Yeah. I think what has been highlighted as we think about this, the work that we've done together at UW Superior and looking at it as a case study, is this iterative process. Megan, you highlighted that some of this data when we started working together wasn't available or wasn't easily available to you as the partner. But when we think through the partnership journey for Mentor Collective, as you both know, we're very outcomes focused. We really want to make sure that we're setting the goals with the institution and driving towards those goals. Then running through the process of recruiting, training, and matching students, providing them with support throughout their mentorship to help have those first conversations and help develop that relationship and that connection to drive sense of belonging. Where this has gotten really interesting for me in the work that we've done together with both of you is that tracking and informing and assessing component, where we're looking at what is the data telling us. You have both highlighted a couple of instances where there were some insights from Mentor Collective data combined with other tools you're using on campus or other conversations happening on campus, where this has made a real impact on either strategic decisions or what the program looks like next year and how we're iterating and how are we serving students that we know are going to benefit from this program. So this is a little bit about that approach, and I think we've been able to really embody this through the UW Superior partnership. Megan, anything you'd like to add here?
I think for us, it's talking about kind of stacking the data that we have. So one of the things that we've done is created an analytics team specific to our Navigate programming. And we are essentially tasked with creating different strategies based off of data. And what's really important is that we're not just looking at the predictive analytics. We're not just saying, okay, here's a high support student, we're going to implement this level of messaging communications, or, this is a low support student, so maybe instead of 3 emails, we're going to send them 2 emails. It's not, that isn't going to be as effective. And so it's stacking those data points along with our predictive analytics. So a student who has a downward trending GPA, looking at their support level, looking at where they fall into those predictive analytics. A student who is, expressing that they have a low sense of belonging on campus, but then are a low support level student. How do we strategize? How do we make sure that we are getting students what they need? How are we preparing mentors to be able to give students what they need in those scenarios as well? So I think that's a big component of that. It's not just looking at one thing, it's trying to stack the data that we've gotten to really prioritize and strategize what we want to do moving forward.
So I'd love to bring you back into the conversation, Dr. Cuzzo, and just hear a little bit more about what lies ahead in the journey of fostering a culture of mentorship at UW Superior.
Well, now that we've gotten some baseline ROI data that confirms for us that there is value going on with retention, there's value going on with belonging and these kinds, and that there is a clear linkage we can draw between the different initiatives that we're invested in right now. We need to go to work this next year in really fostering a culture of mentorship at UW Superior. Now, I think we're going to build it on a very strong base. And what I mean by that is our Forward Superior plan has 3 basic pillars to it that all link together effectively in this idea of mentorship of students. One is we've committed to being a culture of care. And this specifically means that we are putting our students first in our decision-making, in our priority setting, and we are attempting to create the terms and conditions at the university that can and will generate that sense of belonging and the warm invitation for students to know that we do care about them. That includes our faculty and staff, by the way. A culture of inclusivity. We're very mindful of the importance that different students have different needs, and we need to be that differentiated care model, such as what Megan has already described earlier today. The inclusivity part ties together with the culture of care beautifully, and mentorship can be one of those key pillars supporting both. And then our third pillar is high quality engaged learning. We have other additional strategic priorities that are evolving at this point in time. So what I see happening here is peer mentorship really provides support in multiples of these silos of activity. And in fact, to me, it can form a bridge between some of these different activities that we are engaging in our campus. Now, UW Superior has a long history of being committed to high quality mentorship. Our faculty and instructors are second to none in the way that they mentor their students in classrooms, but also through very specialized things like undergraduate research and engaged activities where students need that one-to-one contribution by the faculty and instructor to their growth. We have many programs, as Megan mentioned earlier, that provide mentoring support, but this one can be our pillar program when it comes to peer-to-peer. And I'm really excited at the prospect of elevating that as a critical way to reach out in a different way to our students. And I think this could make all the difference in the world moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that leads me into identifying the student needs. So this is something that Maria brought up earlier about a group of students that we were able to identify that don't have a major connection to campus. So they're not an international student, or they're not an athlete, they're not part of Bridge, Trio, any of those pieces. And it's a pretty large number of our students, and 62% retention is pretty low. So we have an opportunity there to utilize Mentor Collective to provide that sense of connection. The student is maybe not part of Trio, maybe they're not part of Bridge, they're not part of a specific program on campus, but they can be part of Mentor Collective and have that peer connection, which I think is really important in that retention piece. And the next slide actually delves a little bit deeper into the actual profile of those students that we identified. So of the 121 students, 53% of them are first gen, 39% Pell, 3% veteran. And if you can think back to the very start, when I first talked about our numbers and our student profiles, this lines up pretty closely. So this isn't something that's shocking to us. This does align with what our student body looks like. But this gives us the opportunity for us to say, like, this is kind of our new target group of students that we really want to implement some of these strategies to get them connected as a first measure. They show a fairly strong academic profile. So again, it's maybe we don't focus so much on that academic piece, but rather we're looking at more of that sense of belonging. But how do we use Mentor Collective and Navigate and predictive analytics to target this population of students to build that sense of belonging? And so I think that's really what our analytics team within Navigate is working through to come up with some of those strategies, and really figure out how to grow this across campus. Maria talked about from the administration level and just the campus-wide level, but now it's really thinking about on our level, the student-facing level, how do we promote this program to students? How do we make sure that they're aware that it's there? How do we encourage them to participate? One of the ideas and thoughts that we've had is in integrating it into our first year experience program. But we've also talked about, we have a weekend of welcome event for new incoming students. And we have talked about having the mentors come in person, and have little kind of pods and groups where that first connection with a mentor can be done in person to really try to build that relationship. And again, maybe it's not totally required, but it's highly encouraged. And then getting them that face-to-face interaction really helps build that. They maybe won't ignore a text from that student if they get a text checking in on them because they met them at one point in time. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to build out and really refine the strategies that we're looking at. But the most important thing is that we've really narrowed down what student population we're looking at to implement the strategies.
So when you think about all of this data, and as you're bringing it together, I'd love to hear from you. Is mentorship worth the investment?
Well, I'll tackle this one first. I think it's true for most universities at this point that we have limited resource environments, and it's very important that retention matters more now than probably ever in our history. So I'll be honest and say that I think the first year or year and a half of Mentor Collective was in the midst and the height of COVID. We had absolutely no sense of focus as to what to do with it. And if I would have had to evaluate this program based on that first year and a half, it probably wouldn't have made the cut. And the reason is that we have to be able to show direct retention, positive impacts, and that we are actually meeting the needs of the students to further along both student success and particularly the belonging aspect. But I think this last year, we've really obtained some data that are preliminary indicators of the true potential of this program. And I'm confident with the planning that Megan and her team are doing, as well as the inclusion of this particular program into the bigger strategic plan and priorities of the institution, that we can get there at the levels of aiding retention that we need. These are tough conversations for campus to have, I think, because you can be very invested in a program, and at the same time, you have to make a business decision about its value. But I'm feeling better and better about our long-term investment in Mentor Collective in light of the most recent data that we have been examining. And I really look forward to seeing if we can realize our full potential.
Thank you so much for that. In order to be a little bit mindful of time, I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit and jump into our next question to you, Megan. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're using Mentor Collective's data to create a holistic view of the student experience.
Yeah, so we obviously get a lot of really big data from Navigate. So we utilize that data for certain outreach and communications across campus, or as we meet with students for various needs, appointments that they create. So the data that we're receiving from Mentor Collective, while we haven't done this yet, is it gives us that thick data. So that connection to students. It allows us to connect with students on a different level. We're getting a little bit more, we're getting deeper into who the student is as a person, and, what are they passionate about and what makes them feel, like they belong somewhere. So I think there's a lot of value in utilizing the big data, but incorporating those pieces of thick data. That's how we get that holistic view of the student experience. We need to understand, yes, it's so important for us to see, okay, this is a first generation college student. That is incredibly important. But what are the other components to that student? Who is that student as an individual? And I think being able to use that thick data gives us more of that holistic view of what that means. And like I said before, it plays into that piece of, how is this student not doing well? They receive this major scholarship academically. They're so prepared for college. It doesn't make sense to me that they're not doing well, because you're just looking at that big data. You're not looking at the thick data. You're not looking at those pieces of who they are as a person and how they make those connections on campus. And I think that's really where we have an opportunity to utilize these pieces and really create that more holistic view of the student experience. And how do we build on that? How do we give students more of that opportunity?
And I know that this is also a big part of the institutional strategy. Dr. Cuzzo, do you want to speak a little bit to this?
Sure. So what Megan just described also reflects what we're doing at the institutional level. Our chancellor had a brilliant insight recently about the shift we're trying to make in our student support service approaches to student success. Historically, UW-Superior, like many other institutions, has created individual centers, individual programs, each of which is like a bag of marbles. Each is beautiful in its own regard, but it doesn't string together into anything. And as a result of that, we are putting great investments into all these different things, which, as the opening slide that Emily shared, our students aren't aware of and don't even realize how valuable those marbles are to them. So instead, we're actively right now working on a strategy that is much more like a string of pearls. We're thinking about it from a student's journey through the collegiate experience, and how do these different places, venues, experts, programs link together in a coherent way so that the student can find and will naturally encounter the aids and supports that they need. So from bag of marbles to string of pearls, that's really our institutional objective right now.
And Dr. Cuzzo, I've been in the higher education space for 15 years, and we are a group that loves to use analogies, but this is one of the best I have ever come across. And I appreciate your vision in this type of translation of how do we really move into that space. And so again, just being mindful of time, I wanted to jump ahead and ask you a little bit about what does some of that data look like that is contextualizing that holistic student experience for you?
Well, I'm going to speak to this one. Of all the data that Mentor Collective provides, and there's a rich set of thick data, as Megan described, this was really the one that got my attention. This is thick granularity about our incoming class of 2022 and how our mentees responded to some of the surveys that were given. You can see here, this is much beyond high school GPA, ACT score. This is very granular into the kind of life experiences that the students in this cohort have lived through or are currently navigating in their years in college. And I just really think if we can look at data like this and picture that in individual students and then figure out how to meet them where they're at, as Megan has so frankly described, we can make a huge difference in moving that belonging needle. So this is an example of the thick data that I really appreciate.
Megan, I know you're on the ground with the flags, and this is providing some additional context for what your students are experiencing. Do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, I actually have a quick student story. I know time is of the essence here, but we actually, in our bridge program, which is our first year program, students are required to take a 3-credit course, and then they also have an advisor that they meet with on a regular basis. And one of our bridge students actually signed up for Mentor Collective and expressed to their mentor 2 times throughout the semester. And we actually got 2 flags that he was really struggling with note taking and test taking and different components of study habits. And when I brought it to the bridge program coordinator, she was in awe because every meeting she's had with the student just said, you know what, I'm doing great, everything's fine. And so I think it just speaks to that piece of, again, we don't always know what's going on with the student, and a student may not want to share all of those pieces with us, but they may have more comfortability with their peer to express how they're feeling and what they're struggling with. And we were very lucky. We have great mentors, and this mentor gave them some insights into note taking and even offered to meet with them one-on-one, but also provided them with resources to our office for study habits. So again, I think it just really pulls all of the pieces that we've been talking about together. I also think it's a really good way for our mentors to feel more connected with us, because we can work with them through some of these flags and help guide and support them through that as well. And I just think overall the flags line up really, really nicely with the alerts and the progress reports and the different things that we're doing within Navigate. So it just, again, gives us another piece of information on how a student's doing from the peer perspective for once.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've mentioned a few times throughout today's conversation of a focus on the mentees, but to your point, mentors being able to provide their mentees with resources does help them to feel more connected, and allow them to learn more about the institution that they're at. Last question to wrap it up for us today. By harnessing the power of Peer Powered Platform, you've been able to really delve into intriguing insights about your students. You've shared a lot of those stories and some of those really key insights that have impacted what your institution is doing as a strategy. But what's the most surprising thing that you've discovered?
I think for me, it has truly been the fact that this program was intended for our new incoming freshmen that were high support level students. And what we ended up finding was that our low support students seemed to get more out of the program and seemed to do significantly better with the support of a mentor. So it just, again, really made us see that there was already a gap there, that we don't provide a lot of programming or specific supports for our low support level students. We provide a lot of supports for our high support level students. And so this is a gap that we didn't anticipate finding, and it is a happy discovery. I think it gives us an opportunity to really build and figure out how to provide those supports for our low support students as well.
For me, two things. One is the thickness and granularity of the data. I think we can glean a lot out of spending time looking at that data. But second is the way that Mentor Collective and peer mentorship in particular can work across so many of our initiatives in an effective way. And I'm very excited as to the changes that might induce all on its own.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to say thank you both so much. I really appreciate you being here, having this conversation, knowledge sharing with our partners, our colleagues, those who are facing similar challenges. Thank you again all for joining us. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation for me. Thank you to our wonderful speakers. We look forward to our continued analysis, and hopefully we'll have an update on this conversation in a year or so.